Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, May 23rd, 2021, and in around a year and a half, we are going to be looking at the 2022 midterm elections, and we will be experiencing that fateful election night if the Democratic Party can retain their trifecta in the United States government. When Barack Obama was first elected in 2008, the Democratic Party also had a trifecta. But then, 2 years later, the GOP won control of the House of Representatives. He was re-elected in 2012, and then 2 years following that, the Democratic Party lost control of the United States Senate, which meant that Congress was divided with the White House. Currently speaking, all of them match up. The House is controlled by Democrats, the Senate is controlled by Democrats, and of course there is a Democrat in the White House. But 2022 might prove to be that 2010 type of year for Democrats if things continue at this rate. In this video, we're going to be discussing why the Democratic Party should be very worried about the outcome of the House elections. I was originally going to go ahead and title this video talking about how the GOP had a likely chance of winning control of the House, but since we are a year and a half, I'm not going to make a declarative statement that can be applied further throughout the year. I am going to wait a little bit more before we actually start to make at least more and more bolder claims towards the election results. But I am going to be honest, the GOP does look like they are in a position where they are going to win back control of the House of Representatives. But that is as it stands in May of 2021. Things can change, but I am going to be very honest. The GOP does have a very good shot, and a better one than not, at winning control of the House. And there's going to be a number of reasons why, so I implore you to watch the entire video before you leave a comment disagreeing with my point, or if you just want to see something, because I might actually cover something that you might agree or disagree with later on throughout the video. So, at face value, what is happening in the 2022 House of Representatives elections? Well, first things first, we don't know what the map is going to look like. That's right. We are looking at a brand new drawn congressional map because of the 2020 census. Now, looking at redistricting alone, this is part of my main reason why I believe the GOP has a very good shot at winning back control of the House of Representatives. As it currently stands, these are our 2020 election results in the House. Democrats won 222 seats, Republicans won 213. Now, this is the closest House majority since 2003, which means that this isn't good for Democrats. 218 are needed for control. Democrats have 222. As Wikipedia tells us, and as something you can do with simple math, the Republican Party only needs to pick up 5 out of 435 seats to win back control. 5 seats. You are looking at the Democratic Party in a position where they could lose more than 5 seats, and the GOP could expand their majority beyond 218, because a 218 majority has never really occurred. That is, due to vacancies, and right now the Democrats don't even have 218 because of vacancies. But they still have the majority, and looking at the House of Representatives here, the Democratic Party is in a position with 222 seats where they have no leeway with their votes. They cannot afford to lose even a single Democratic vote because of vacancies. So 222 to 213 is not this large majority. It was never described as one and should never be perceived as one. But this is why it gets worse. I mentioned the redistricting process because the 2020 census allowed for redistricting to occur. Essentially, it is letting the Census Bureau go ahead and go into each individual state and make the determination about how many people live in each state based off responses. I had someone from the Census Bureau knock on my door, ask how many people lived in the household, filled out all that data, so that way they can get an accurate representation of who is in each individual state. Well, because of that, and because populations change, states begin to get more congressional districts or less congressional districts. But the redistricting opportunity allows every state to redraw their districts. For instance, California has 52 districts. They had 53, which means they now need to eliminate one, which means the entire map is going to change. Some of these states are going to replicate their boundaries because they've been gerrymandered or favored in one way that the incumbent party might be happy with the way that they're going. For instance, in Maryland, I don't think the Democratic Party is going to jump on the opportunity to make an 8-0 congressional district election or map, but they might. But right now, it's 7-1, which I think the Democratic Party is complacent with. But if they start to see maps drop with the Republicans redistricting in full force, well, you might see states such as Maryland and Massachusetts have sole Democratic delegations, even though around a third of the population in both of those states are Republican voters. Besides that, just looking at our map here, it tells you who has control over each individual state. Green means that there's an independent commission. Yellow means that it's a split delegation, which means that there might be a Democratic governor that can veto the Republican House for the case in the state of Minnesota. Or there might just be a Democratic House and a Republican state Senate in another state. That's what the split means, and that's why it's in yellow. But for the red and blue states, I think those are pretty easy to understand. Red states are states where Republicans have full control over the redistricting process. You might be surprised to see a state such as New Hampshire, but because Democrats dropped the ball in the 2020 election, the Republican Party won key races where it really mattered. They won back control of the state delegation in Minnesota, won back control of the state delegation in New Hampshire, where Republicans now have a trifecta in a state where Democrats won by 7 points in the 2020 election. But if you look at some of these states that are controlled by Republicans, they're in very populous ones. Texas, which is 38 congressional districts. You're looking at Florida, which will have 28 congressional districts. You're looking at the state of North Carolina. You're looking at the state of Ohio, Georgia, states with double-digit amounts in terms of the amount of congressional districts, which means the amount of districts that they can draw in favor of their party. I mean, there's free reign here for Republicans, and not to say the Democrats won't try to do the same, but the balance of power here is shifted disproportionately towards the Republican Party. New York and Illinois are the only real big states the Democrats have control over. Even California and Washington and Michigan and Virginia, Arizona, Colorado, states won by Biden, have independent commissions which will try to draw fairer maps than a state delegation would. And I do want to point out the reason why many of these states have independent commissions is because the Democratic Party has mainly been the party that is willing to allow their own states to follow through with this. Republicans have not. That's the case. You know, Idaho, Montana, 2 states that voted for Trump, but the rest of the states, all of them, besides those 2, with independent commissions, all voted for Biden. So these independent commissions are largely propped up in states that Democrats have some type of leverage over, and it's largely because Democrats have been trying to lead this effort of getting gerrymandered banned through the Supreme Court, banned through legislation, trying to change things in terms of the way that districts are drawn with their newfound trifecta. I mean, the control isn't necessarily as strong as they'd like it to be, but I think they're trying to take a step in the right direction. But the thing is, the majority of these Republican states are willing to use their control to draw their own districts. So redistricting alone will likely be that sole reason why Democrats lose control of the House. At least if it was to boil down to one thing, it would be redistricting. But also we have to talk about how Democrats aren't even up by as much as they should be entering into 2022. I've been looking at the generic ballot polling data over the past couple of months here. We're looking at May and April, and I've actually averaged all of the data given to us. When you put all of these numbers in, and I decided to go with the regular voting number because it was a little bit bigger of a sample than the likely voter one for Redfield and Wilton strategies, but for the rest of them, I averaged them all in, and you can average them all together yourself, and you will see that the average result is the Democrats are up 3.8%. Now, 3.8% is still a lead. 3.8% is not, me trying to say, oh, the Democrats are absolutely going to lose the popular vote. This means they are doomed for re-election. But I do want to point out that 3.8% is not necessarily where they would like to be. To put that into context, the Democratic Party won in 2020 with a 3.1% victory on the popular vote. But that was with a more favorable map. Republicans are going to be drawing a new map that is less favorable. And Republicans even picked up a net 12 seats. They flipped 15 seats in 2020. So Republicans were able to do a lot of damage towards Democrats. They were able to take states or districts that essentially were strong for Democrats in 2018 and were not strong at all in 2020. A net gain of 12 with a victory of 3.1% should make Democrats worried about what it means if they're only up by 3.8%. And I know what you might be thinking. Oh, Democrats have room to grow. They can expand their generic ballot. But I do want to remind you that in 2018, there wasn't as much of an expansion as there was a continuation of the generic ballot data. At this point in time, in 2017, the Democrats were up 7 points. Today, they're only up 3.8%. And as the months and months progressed, the Democratic Party never really faltered. They ended up being ahead 7.3% and ended up winning by 8.4%. But in 2020, it was a little bit different of a story. The numbers seem to be pretty far off. Democrats even were up higher than where they were in May of 2019 than where they were today. They ended up only winning by 3.1% and lost net 12 seats. Democrats went from 235 down to 222. That's a significant reduction. That is a very significant reduction in terms of the amount of seats that the Democratic Party had, because it went from a majority that could allow for at least 10 Democrats to vote against party line, now at this point where they can't even afford 2 or 3, given the vacancies in the House of Representatives. And I think that puts the Democratic Party at an even more difficult position, because now they can't pass major pieces of legislation, which means that the House is going to seem as if they're not getting much done under Democratic control. And another thing to put the generic ballot polls into perspective, with the Democrats up 3.8%, you might be thinking they have room to grow. But the thing is, they really don't. This 3.8% lead is on the same type of question and American public that approves of Joe Biden by 13.7%. So you're looking at an American public voting group that approves of Biden by 14 points, yet only backs Democrats by 4 points. So that means there's probably a significant portion of the population that is saying, I agree with what Biden is doing, I approve of what Biden is doing, but I don't necessarily want to vote for a Democrat. His performance in the White House is not making me want to vote for a Democrat. Many of these people are leaving room for voting for Republicans for a reason. They are leaving this opportunity. They are allowing this to be in discussion, because just because they like Joe Biden does not mean they are bound to vote for the Democrats. That's the thing. So what's really throwing me for a loop here, I think that the fact is that the Democratic Party has a 4-point lead in the generic ballot over the past 2 months, yet a 14-point advantage in the approval rating of Joe Biden, which means that there is a lot of crossover votes, or a lot of people that are saying, I may approve of Joe Biden, but I'm not necessarily willing to vote for a Democrat, which would worry Democrats even more, because Obama started out with an even higher approval rating. Looking at his early numbers, you're talking about a president that started out at this point in time with a 64% approval rating before the 2010 midterm elections. Do I have to remind you what happened in 2010? The Republicans picked up, get this, 63 seats in the House. This is because the Democratic Party went from a point where they were actually going to win in 2010. They went from a point where Barack Obama was approved of, and thus the Democratic Party took a lead in the generic ballot. I mean, it made sense. The incumbent president was approved of, and therefore the generic ballot actually showed him ahead. Now, even with Barack Obama being approved of with 64% in May of 2009, only 42% of the public said they would vote for Democrats. So right now, you're looking at a very similar situation unfolding, where Democrats are starting out with the lead, but only because of the approval rating being high, which means that when Obama went from 64% into 2010 around November time period down to being disapproved of by 2 points on the national level, you saw the generic ballot follow suit. It was very closely correlated to the approval rating of Barack Obama. Started out very strong, got even higher, and then it started narrowing and narrowing and narrowing, and then Obama started to become disapproved. And then it got down to a point where it was very, very close. And then Republicans started taking away, started expanding and expanding and expanding and expanding their lead until a point where they were up 9.4% on Election Day in November of 2010. So the 2010 midterm elections, we saw, the Republicans pick up 63 seats. But this was not even the worst year on record for Democrats in the House. In 2014, Barack Obama was just after, being reelected in 2012. He was approved of in November of 2012, went on to win re-election, and I'm sure you can sort of assume exactly what happened. Democrats took the lead. Because Democrats won that election, people were still happy with Obama. His approval rating was still high, but then things started to get worse. The approval rating started to dwindle, and Democrats and Republicans became neck and neck. And by the final few months of the campaign season, Republicans took ahead and won the popular vote by 5.7%. But what this did in the House of Representatives, because it was a brand new map after the 2010 census and Republicans had a lot of control, Republicans won 13 additional seats, giving the Republicans 247 seats in the House of Representatives. Look at how red this map is. Compare it to the 2020 map. Less red for a reason. There was so much red on this map. This was the worst year in the 21st century for Democrats in the House. All because Barack Obama wasn't popular. Think about that. So if Biden is popular now, and the Democrats are only up by 4 points, can you imagine what happens when he falls out of favor? Biden isn't going to remain popular forever. This is not something that happens. There has never been a president in history where they have been approved of the entire time. And Joe Biden likely won't be the first. And then another point, beyond redistricting, beyond history, beyond the approval ratings, we also have House ratings for our current House map. Assuming that redistricting did not occur, the Sabato's crystal ball released House ratings for each individual race. In the toss-up column on the Republican side, they only have 2. On the Democratic side, they have 19. Keep in mind the Republicans only would need 5 out of these 19 seats to win back control. This is what the map looks like. 203 to 211. Republicans already start out with the advantage before redistricting occurs. So there's a lot of things here that needs to be discussed. When you're looking at the approval rating of the president and the midterm election data, it is closely correlated. Even with Donald Trump, someone who the polls seem to be missing the mark for time and time again, when he was disapproved of by 11 points as a net average, Democrats won control of the House in 2018 after losing it for 8 years. The approval rating certainly does matter, and as much as Biden is approved of now, 14 points is only translating to a 4-point victory. That personally would make me, if I was a Democratic operative, if I was someone on Capitol Hill working for the Democrats and I was looking at that, I would be scared. I would be looking at this and saying, holy crap, we might get wiped out if we don't change things now. If we don't start making inroads, and if we don't start registering voters, and if we don't start appealing to the masses like we did in 2020 and 2018, we are going to get wiped out. Because the honeymoon period for Joe Biden can only last for so long. Combined with the fact of redistricting occurring, the current House ratings showing unfavorable numbers, and just history itself, these all sort of tell me exactly what we've known for a while. The Democratic Party will be at a disadvantage in 2022, and it's on them to do damage control. Because like I had mentioned very early on in the video, this is a very close majority, the closest since 2003. And I can't really find a scenario as it stands now where Democrats actually retain the House majority. Republicans are going to use everything they can in order to win. They are not going to let a single seat go to waste. You're going to see states such as Indiana, which had 2 Democratic districts, revert down to 1. You're going to see a state such as Florida, which has a handful of Democratic districts, which will revert down to just, a couple. Looking at the states with their power, and the Republicans in control, they're going to do everything they can. Because to be completely honest, both parties would do this, given this position. But the fact is, there's a disproportionate amount of power on the side of the GOP, and they are going to leverage that. When I'm looking at Texas, and I'm looking at Georgia, and I'm looking at North Carolina, these are states where you are going to see Democratic incumbents face off against each other in primaries, because they have been exiled from their districts. The Texas Republicans are going to draw districts around Houston, into Fort Worth. You're going to be looking at areas that have large cities that aren't going to have many Democratic representatives because they're going to be picked out. You're going to be looking at a major city with 9 districts comprising it, so that way the districts can be drawn in such a way where you would be looking at a congressional district that can take the significant portions of populations from inner cities, yet more of the population comes from the outskirts, and it's drawn in such a weird fashion. You can actually take a look at the Texas map right now because it tells you some very interesting results. It shows you exactly how crazy some of these districts can get. I think Texas is a perfect example of drawing out some of these districts. You're looking at the 32nd district, carrying out parts of Dallas, the 30th, and the 33rd. But that's really the only area where you see blue on this entire map. There's a lot more blue around this area, but it's all red because you're looking at the 24th district, peeling out certain parts of this area in order to get more voters, yet Republicans seem to be ahead. Looking at the 5th district, you're looking at peel away some voters within this area, yet the Republicans still win because the majority of the population isn't from inside of there. They're splitting up the major cities because they know that if the maps were drawn fairly, if you were taking Dallas and trying to add it into a northern part of Texas, that really doesn't make sense. But if they were to draw the maps fairly, Democrats would win many more districts in Texas or Georgia or North Carolina. I mean, even recently in 2018, Democrats would have won the amount of the popular vote in North Carolina, meaning they would have won the popular vote in North Carolina had they ran a candidate in the 3rd district. But they ended up losing it by around a point. Yet they only won 3 seats out of the 13 in North Carolina. The House of Representatives is supposed to be a representation of the population, a representation of the popular vote in each individual state. But that is not the case. And right now, most of that power is on the Republican side. So right now, 2022 seems to be this perfect storm for the GOP, and the Democratic Party does have some opportunities to prevent a lot of damage. But I'm not going to lie. This looks very good for the GOP, and they are already starting out with the advantage due to a number of things that can't even be decided now. Due to the 2020 election results, due to the way that the districts were drawn in the past, setting some type of precedence for certain states, the legislature races that they won in 2020 and 2018 that they did not win in 2008 or 2010, Democrats used to have control on a number of states that they no longer have control on, which means they will no longer be able to temper some of these more insanely drawn maps. Democrats might try to fight fire with fire, but the reality of the situation is Republicans have the majority of control over House districts. That, combined with everything else, is why I personally believe the Democratic Party should be very worried about 2022 in the House, because they can expand their Senate majority, but if it doesn't make it through the House first, it's a done deal. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today. And I think I meant to say analysis. I don't think I said that word correctly. But again, see you guys later today.